Hot diesel air and the sharp peal of horn blasts vibrated the guardrails of Eco Bridge as evening descended over Lagos. The billionaire Tony Okafor sat in his black SUV, staring through tinted windows at the lagoon's tinfoil glitter stretching toward Victoria Island. His goal was simple: get to the celebration where investors waited with champagne and congratulations. But something felt wrong. The record-breaking deal that should have filled him with triumph felt like a heavy stone lodged in his chest. Success had become a weight he carried, not a joy he celebrated. Then movement on the median caught his eye. A ragged 10-year-old girl crouched beside the traffic barrier, her thin frame silhouetted against the setting sun. She held something small in her hands, her last ball of akara, golden and precious. Tony watched, mesmerized, as she carefully broke the fried bean cake in half. The first piece went to a scrawny kitten mewing at her bare feet. She stroked its matted fur with tenderness, smiled like she owned the sun itself, then watched it trot away into the chaos of evening traffic. The girl vanished into the crowd of hawkers and commuters, but her image burned in Tony's mind. He whispered to himself, "Why do I feel so empty?" The convoy began to move forward, but Tony suddenly leaned toward his driver. "Turn around." Back at his penthouse, crystal glasses clinked against cold marble floors while champagne created a golden haze over the celebration. Tony moved through his own party like a ghost. He was going to fake joy for the investors who surrounded him with hungry smiles and calculating eyes. He lifted his glass for a toast, but the words tasted metallic in his mouth. The usual phrases about success and profitable partnerships felt hollow as empty shells on a beach. Then his phone buzzed with an incoming call. His mother's voice sliced through the orchestrated music and forced laughter. "Money can't hold you at night, son. When will you learn what really matters?" Tony lowered his champagne glass as the scene from the bridge replayed in his mind, the girl's gentle smile, her selfless act of sharing when she had almost nothing. Around him, people discussed quarterly profits and market projections, but all he could think about was that moment of pure kindness. The investor beside him was mid-sentence about expansion opportunities when Tony did something that shocked everyone in the room, including himself. He set down his glass, walked to the center of the marble floor, and simply left his own party mid-speech. The silence behind him was deafening, but for the first time in years, Tony felt like he could breathe. Dawn painted Eco Bridge in soft colors as Tony returned alone, without his usual security detail. Harmattan grit scratched his throat while Danfo buses coughed black smoke into the morning air. Street vendors were already setting up their stalls, preparing for another day of survival. He wanted to find the girl who had cracked something open inside his chest. Most hawkers just shrugged when he described the barefoot child who fed stray cats. They had their own struggles, their own daily battles to fight. But a bottle collector, a boy with intelligent eyes that seemed older than his years, paused when Tony mentioned the broken akara and the kitten. "You mean the girl with the sick grandmother," the boy said, recognition dawning on his face. "She picks plastic bottles by the big billboard every morning, sells them to buy medicine." Tony felt a jolt of hope surge through him like electricity. The girl was real, not just a vision born from his guilty conscience. She had a story, a life, problems he might actually be able to help solve. "Show me," Tony told the boy urgently, already reaching for his wallet. The boy pocketed the money and nodded toward the maze of narrow alleys that stretched beyond the bridge. Together, they disappeared into the labyrinth where hope seemed as scarce as clean water. The fish brine breeze from the lagoon mixed with diesel fumes as they walked deeper into the slums. Under a faded luxury billboard advertising cars none of these families could ever afford, Tony scanned faces quickly, his aim focused: find her before she disappeared again. Then he spotted them, a plastic-filled sack leaning against a concrete pillar, and beside it, a torn schoolbook with Ifyinanya scribbled on the cover in careful handwriting that spoke of dreams bigger than circumstances. An old woman selling single cigarettes from a wooden tray looked up at him with suspicion. "You police? Government? We don't want trouble here." "No, ma'am. I just want to help a child." Her expression softened slightly. "That girl works harder than grown men. Collects bottles all day, studies by candlelight all night." She paused, then muttered almost to herself, "She sleeps near the tin huts with her grandmother who coughs blood every night. The old woman is dying, and there's no money for proper medicine." The name Ifeananya hit Tony like a gentle hand placed on his shoulder. She wasn't just the girl anymore. She was a person with a name, a story, a grandmother who was dying. Tony clutched the torn schoolbook tighter and headed toward the cluster of tin roofs, his expensive shoes looking alien against the red dust. Paraffin smoke stung Tony's eyes as he approached the tiny tin roof hut that barely looked large enough for two people. He wanted to enter without frightening them, without making them feel like he was another threat in lives that had seen too many. He knocked gently on the wooden door frame. "Ifeananya?" The door opened, and there she was, the girl from the bridge. Inside the cramped space, she knelt beside a thin mattress, pressing a damp cloth to her grandmother's fevered forehead. Her movements were alert and protective, like a small lioness guarding her pride. When Tony pulled out an envelope thick with cash, Ifeananya shook her head firmly. Her voice was clear and dignified despite her ragged clothes. "Kindness is already paid for by God. We don't need money for that." Tony was about to respond when the grandmother's breathing changed. Her chest had been rising and falling in labored rhythm, but suddenly it rattled with a wet, disturbing sound. Then it fell ominously quiet. Ifeanyanya's eyes widened with terror as she pressed her ear to the old woman's chest. "Grandmama? Grandmama." The silence stretched like a held breath, and Tony realized they were balanced on the edge of either miracle or heartbreak. The antiseptic tang of disinfectant filled Tony's nostrils as fluorescent tube lights flickered overhead in the hospital corridor. His aim had become desperately urgent: get help immediately, before it was too late for the old woman who had raised a girl capable of such extraordinary kindness. He had scooped up the grandmother's frail body and rushed her onto a hospital gurney, signing forms and authorizing treatments without reading a single word. Money was no object when a life hung in the balance. A nurse in crisp white uniform approached him with cautious optimism in her voice. She whispered the crucial reveal: "The pneumonia is severe, but she's responding to treatment. However, she needs steady, consistent care over time, not just a one-time miracle intervention." Tony felt relief flood through him like warm water. The grandmother would live, but only with proper, ongoing medical attention, something that required resources this family had never possessed. "Then we'll build the steady care she needs," Tony said with quiet determination. The nurse looked at him curiously, perhaps wondering what he meant by build. But Tony was already planning, already thinking beyond this single crisis to the larger problems that created such situations. If one grandmother needed steady care, how many others were suffering in silence, waiting for help that would never come? The evening air carried the sweet scent of frangipani blossoms as Tony's car pulled up to the imposing gates of his Ikoyi mansion. He was trying to make them feel safe crossing from their world of scarcity into his world of glass and marble, without overwhelming them with the sheer scale of his wealth. Ifeananya hesitated at the threshold, her bare feet stopping just short of the polished driveway. The mansion loomed before them like a palace from a fairy tale, beautiful but intimidating to a child who had never owned more than she could carry. Tony knelt down to her eye level, his expensive suit touching the ground without concern. "Your choices matter here, Ifeananya. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. No one will force you to do anything you don't want to do." His house staff, gardeners, cooks, and security guards, stopped their work to gape at the unprecedented sight of their billionaire employer gently guiding a barefoot child and a recovering elderly woman through the front doors. The grandmother, still weak but breathing steadier after hospital treatment, looked around with wonder at the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. As they crossed into the air-conditioned foyer, Tony called out to his household manager, "Get the doctors on call, tonight. We're going to need ongoing medical support." In the garden veranda, crickets ticked their evening song while the generator hummed low in the background. Tony's aim was simple but profound: learn what this remarkable child actually wanted from life, beyond mere survival. Ifeananya stared at the koi pond where colorful fish swam in peaceful circles, their movements creating gentle ripples in the illuminated water. The garden was like nothing she had ever seen: green grass, blooming flowers, the luxury of beauty for its own sake. "What do you want, Ifeananya?" Tony asked softly. Toys? Games? New clothes? She was quiet for a long moment, watching the fish dance beneath the surface. Then she spoke with startling clarity. I want school. Real school, not just thrown away books. I want to help people properly, like doctors do. I want to learn how to save lives. Tony felt something shift inside his chest. He realized with sudden shame that he hadn't asked anyone a genuine question about their dreams in years. His conversations were all about deals, profits, acquisitions, never about what people actually hoped for. School, he repeated, the word feeling sacred on his tongue. Then you start tomorrow, he said, already reaching for his phone to make the calls that would change her life forever. He dialed 3 numbers at once, the best private schools in Lagos, tutors, and educational consultants who specialized in gifted children. The private study smelled of leather-bound books and fresh paper as Tony worked late into the night. He wanted to complete the paperwork that would make everything official and legal. He read through Ifeanyi's tragic file: no parents, both dead from preventable diseases, street-born resilience that had kept her alive, a perfect ear for numbers that suggested natural mathematical genius. Every page told the story of potential trapped by circumstances. His lawyer, Mr. Ademola, had arrived near midnight with a briefcase full of documents. He slid a set of official forms across the mahogany desk: adoption papers, legal guardianship forms, trust fund establishment documents. It's possible to adopt her, if you really mean it, Ademola said carefully. But Tony, this is a lifetime commitment. Are you prepared for that? Tony stared at the papers. 24 hours ago, he had been a man consumed by business deals and profit margins. Now he was contemplating becoming a father to a child who had taught him more about life in one day than he had learned in 40 years. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his gold pen. The weight of the decision felt enormous, not because he doubted it, but because he understood how completely it would change both their lives. The pen hovered over the signature line as the clock struck midnight. Cool stone pressed against Tony's bare feet as he descended the staircase early the next morning. The kettle was whistling in the kitchen, and he was going to check on Ifeanyi before her first day at the prestigious school he had arranged. But he found her curled up on the marble landing, crying softly into her knees. The sight of her tears hit him like a physical blow. What's wrong, my dear? He asked, sitting carefully beside her. I had dreams about my parents, she whispered through her sobs. They died when I was 6. Mama Aduni told me they got sick with fever, and I couldn't do anything to help them. I was too small, too useless. Tony felt his own eyes burn. Is that why you want to be a doctor? She nodded, wiping her nose on her sleeve. So other children won't feel helpless like I did. So they won't have to watch people they love die. The weight of her pain and determination struck Tony speechless. This 10-year-old girl carried more purpose than most adults he knew. She had turned her deepest trauma into her highest calling. Ifeanyi, he said gently, then let's make you someone who can save lives. Someone who can do what you couldn't do before. She looked up at him with those ancient, wise eyes. Do you really think I can? I know you can. The classroom air was thick with chalk dust and the bright laughter of privileged children as Ifeanyi walked into Corona School wearing her crisp new uniform. The fabric felt stiff and foreign against her skin, but she knew she had to blend in enough to avoid unwanted attention and blaze forward academically. Her new teacher, Mrs. Adebayo, handed out a mathematics quiz intended to assess the student's current level. The other children groaned and complained about the difficulty, but Ifeanyi bent over her paper with intense concentration. 20 minutes later, she had demolished every problem on the test, including several that were meant for students 2 grades ahead. Even the stern headmistress raised her eyebrows when she saw the perfect score. A shy girl named Kemi leaned over during recess. How did you learn to solve problems so fast? My father hired tutors and I still struggle with math. Ifeanyi's answer was simple but haunting. Because I promised the dead that I would become someone worth their sacrifice. The playground fell quiet around them as other children sensed they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. Outside the school gates, Tony sat in his car watching through the fence. When he saw his new daughter's confident stride and the respect already growing in her classmates' eyes, his own eyes filled with tears of pride. The hospital room smelled of menthol rub and antiseptic while monitors beeped steadily in the background. Tony's aim was straightforward: ensure the grandmother's complete recovery and establish long-term care. Doctors had been reporting steady improvement all week. Mama Aduni's breathing was clear, her fever had broken, and the dangerous fluid in her lungs had responded well to treatment. When she finally woke up fully alert, her first words were directed at Tony with a mischievous smile. "Keep your hands clean, rich man. Money can make them very dirty if you're not careful." Tony threw back his head and laughed, genuinely, freely, for the first time in months. The old woman's wisdom and humor reminded him that wealth was a tool, not a goal. Just as he was beginning to relax, his phone buzzed against his chest. The screen lit up with a name he hadn't expected to see: his ex-wife, Adana. They had divorced 3 years ago when his obsession with building his empire had finally killed their marriage. She had begged him to slow down, to remember what mattered, but he had been too blind to listen. Now her name on his phone felt like a message from his past, a reminder of what his choices had cost him. He stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the answer button. Salt air drifted across the outdoor tables at the Marina Cafe while cutlery clattered against ceramic plates and seagulls called overhead. Tony wanted to face his past honestly, without defensiveness or excuses. Adana sat across from him, looking older but peaceful in a way he remembered from their early days together. She had always been beautiful, but now she radiated the contentment of someone who had found her true path. "You look different," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "I feel different." "The girl," Adana said simply. It wasn't a question. Tony pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of Ifeanyi in her school uniform, bright-eyed and determined. "Her name is Ifeanyi. I'm adopting her." Adana studied the picture with genuine interest. "She looks like she has fire in her spirit." "What happened to change you?" "You were right," Tony admitted. "You married my ambition, not me. I lost myself in deals and acquisitions and forgot how to be human." She nodded toward the photo of Ifeanyi. "Maybe you've finally married your heart instead." Just then, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his corporate board: "Board meeting emergency. Shareholders uneasy about your recent philanthropy. Some investors say charity work is spooking the market. We need to discuss your priorities immediately." The boardroom felt like an Arctic wasteland with its cold air conditioning and glass reflections that seemed to multiply the tension in the room. Tony's aim was crystal clear: assert his new priorities regardless of shareholder concerns. Around the polished conference table sat men in expensive suits who had helped him build his empire but had never understood why it mattered. Their faces showed barely concealed frustration with his recent charitable phase. "Gentlemen," Tony announced, standing at the head of the table, "I'm establishing the Tony Okafor Foundation. We'll be funding community clinics, educational scholarships, and healthcare programs across Nigeria." The silence was deafening. Finally, Director Emeka spoke with obvious disdain: "Tony, charity work won't raise our stock price. Investors want profits, not feel-good stories." Tony looked around the room at faces he had once considered allies. "You're absolutely right, Emeka. Charity won't raise our stock price." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But it might raise me into the kind of man worth being. And that, gentlemen, is a return on investment I'm finally ready to make." The vote loomed before them like a line drawn in sand. Around the table, hands hovered in the air as board members faced a choice between profit and purpose. Tony realized he didn't care which way they voted. For the first time in his business career, he was going to do what was right instead of what was profitable. Dust clouds billowed like brown fog while the roar of bulldozers filled the air with mechanical violence. Tony knew he had to do something urgently: stop the destruction before families lost everything they had. He stepped directly in front of a massive yellow machine, forcing the operator to slam on his brakes. The engine died with a mechanical wheeze as Tony pulled out his phone and speed-dialed the city commissioner. "Stop all demolition immediately," he barked into the phone while families huddled behind him with their belongings in plastic bags. "I want legal injunctions filed within the hour." But then came the reveal that hit him like a physical blow. The demolition foreman approached with a clipboard, his face nervous but determined. "Sir, I have to tell you, this development is being funded by Okafor Holdings. It's a subsidiary of your own company. The papers are all legal and signed." Tony felt the world tilt sideways. His own empire was destroying the community he was trying to help. Years of delegated authority and subsidiary companies had created a monster he hadn't even known existed. He took the phone and spoke very quietly, but his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I don't care what papers were signed or what profits were projected. Shut it down." The bulldozers fell silent as drivers climbed down from their machines, confusion written across their faces. The kitchen was warm with the scent of spices and the soft clink of ceramic mugs as Tony and Ifeanyi sat at the breakfast counter late that night. His aim was complex: explain the rot that had infected his empire without destroying a child's faith in him. "Papa Tony," Ifeanyi said, wrapping her small hands around her mug of hot chocolate, "how did you not know your own company was hurting people?" Tony sighed deeply. When you build something too big, too fast, you stop seeing the details. "I created a machine that made money, but I forgot to program it with a conscience." Ifeanyi listened with the intense focus she brought to everything important, then said something that stopped his heart. "Fixing it is going to be bigger than just me, isn't it?" "Yes, Omo me. Much bigger." "Then we'll get bigger too," she said with the calm confidence of someone who had already survived impossible things. Tony marveled at her wisdom, but then she asked the question that would change everything. "Can we build a clinic first, right where Grandmama used to stand in those long lines, waiting for help that never came?" In that moment, Tony saw not just a foundation or a charity project, but a complete reimagining of what his wealth could accomplish. "Yes," he said simply. "We can build whatever you dream." The architect's studio smelled of ink and foam model glue while coffee steam rose from abandoned cups scattered across drafting tables. Tony wanted to sketch out a clinic shaped entirely by Ifeanyi's vision of what healing should look like. She bent over the large paper with colored pencils, drawing with the same intensity she brought to mathematics problems. Her design showed a waiting area that felt like a peaceful courtyard rather than a sterile medical facility, complete with storybooks for children and windows positioned to let in maximum sunlight. The lead architect, a woman named Mrs. Baligan, watched Ifeanyi work with growing amazement. "You understand patient psychology better than doctors who've been practicing for decades. This design would actually help people heal faster." Ifeanyi looked up from her drawing, pencil shavings in her hair, and smiled with quiet satisfaction. "When you've been sick and scared, you remember what would have made you feel better." Mrs. Baligan studied the detailed plans with professional respect. "You think like a doctor already." Ifeanyi's response was simple but filled with unshakable determination: "I'm going to be one." The adults in the room exchanged glances, recognizing they were witnessing the birth of something extraordinary, not just a building, but a calling that would reshape how healthcare was delivered in their community. Tony watched his daughter design the future and knew his money had finally found its true purpose. The courtroom smelled of polished wood while distant traffic hummed beyond the tall windows. Tony wanted to make their new relationship official under Nigerian law. Judge Adeyemi, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, read through their testimonies with careful attention. She glanced toward Mama Adunni, who sat in the front row wearing her best dress and nodding her approval with tears in her eyes. "I have reviewed all the documentation," the judge announced formally. Character references, financial statements, home studies, and most importantly, the wishes of the child involved. The courtroom was so quiet Tony could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. "By the power vested in me by the Federal Republic of Nigeria," Judge Adeyemi declared, raising her official stamp, "I hereby declare that Tony Chigozie Okafor and Ifeanyi Okafor are now legally father and daughter." The stamp came down with a solid thump that seemed to echo through the building. As they stood to leave, Ifeanyi slipped her small hand into Tony's much larger one. She looked up at him with eyes that held all the trust in the world and whispered the word that changed everything. "Dad." The single syllable contained years of hope, dreams, and unconditional love. The evening call to prayer drifted across the air while the sweet scent of fried plantains wafted from nearby food vendors. What Tony wanted to do was personal but also important. Introduce Ifeanyi to the woman who might become part of their growing family. Her name was Grace, and she was a pediatric nurse at the teaching hospital where Mama Adunni had been treated. Tony had met her during one of his visits, drawn to her gentle competence and the way she treated every patient like family. Ifeanyi, Grace said, kneeling to the girl's eye level, your father tells me you want to be a doctor. What kind of medicine interests you most? Tony noticed that Grace asked about Ifeanyi's dreams before asking about anything else. Not about school, not about the mansion, not about the dramatic change in her circumstances. She wanted to know about the girl's heart first. Ifeanyi smiled, clearly pleased by the genuine interest. Children's medicine. I want to help kids who feel helpless the way I used to feel. Grace nodded with professional understanding. The world needs more pediatric doctors who remember what it feels like to be a scared child. As they walked down the street together, Grace looked at both father and daughter with quiet affection. I'd like to be here, if you'll have me, she said softly. Tony felt his heart open to accommodate even more love. Purple jacaranda blossoms drifted down like confetti while guitar strings hummed with gentle music. The goal was beautiful in its simplicity. Stitched together a family based on love rather than obligation. Under the spreading branches of the ancient tree in Tony's garden, they exchanged vows that were more promises than performances. Grace wore a simple white dress, Tony had chosen traditional Nigerian attire, and Ifeanyi stood beside them in a bright yellow dress that made her look like captured sunshine. The ceremony was small but perfect. Mama Adunni laughed herself to tears during the traditional blessings, and Tony's parents, who had flown in from Abuja, whispered prayers over Ifeanyi as if she had always been their granddaughter. Family, the officiant declared, is not just blood, but choice. Today we witness the choice to love unconditionally. As they sealed their vows with rings and promises, a courier in a motorcycle helmet appeared at the garden gate with a package marked urgent. Tony signed for the delivery and unrolled the contents. Architectural blueprints stamped with official seals and the words, Community Hospital, Phase 1 construction approved. The timing felt like a blessing from above, as if the universe was celebrating not just their marriage, but their shared commitment to healing their community. The future was beginning to take concrete shape. Years later, the university laboratory hummed with the scent of ethanol and the steady whir of centrifuges working through the night. Ifeanyi swore to ace her final examinations and secure placement in Nigeria's most competitive medical program. She moved between experiments with the confidence of someone born to the sciences, mentoring younger students between her own advanced research projects. Her professors regularly remarked that she possessed an intuitive understanding of medicine that couldn't be taught. As she calibrated a microscope for her final pathology practical, her laptop chimed with an incoming email. The sender was the University of Lagos College of Medicine, and the subject line made her hands tremble, Scholarship Award Notification. She opened the message with her heart pounding against her ribs. The first line read, Congratulations. You have been awarded the full Chancellor's Scholarship for Medical Studies, reserved for Nigeria's most promising future physicians. Ifeanyi pushed back from the lab bench and ran to the building's balcony overlooking the campus. The Lagos skyline stretched before her, millions of lights representing millions of lives she might someday help save. She pulled out her phone and speed-dialed the number she had called every day for years. Dad, she shouted into the phone, her voice echoing across the university grounds. It's happening. Everything we dreamed, it's really happening. Dawn was breaking over the construction site when Tony arrived, the air thick with the scent of wet cement and the sight of rebar skeletons rising toward the sky. His aim was logistical but vital, ensure the hospital opened on schedule, within budget, and with complete integrity. He had made revolutionary decisions for the project, hiring workers exclusively from the local community, setting living wages well above industry standards, and posting transparent budget reports on the construction gate for anyone to examine. The approach had raised eyebrows among other developers, but Tony no longer cared about industry norms. He cared about building something that would serve the community rather than exploit it. Engineer Babatunde, the site foreman, approached him with a clipboard and a troubled expression. "Sir, I need to report something. We discovered discrepancies in the supply invoices. Someone has been inflating material costs and pocketing the difference." "Who?" Tony asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Your cousin Chitty, sir. He's been running a kickback scheme with one of the suppliers. We estimate he's stolen nearly 2 million naira from the project." The news hit Tony like a physical blow. Family corruption, the very thing he had sworn to eliminate from his business practices. Without hesitation, Tony pulled out his phone and called Chitty directly. "You're fired," he said simply. "Pack your things and leave the site immediately." Blood relations meant nothing when community trust was at stake. The hospital inauguration blazed with white coats and palm fronds while traditional drums echoed across the packed courtyard. Ifeanyi was emotionally overwhelmed. She was opening doors to people who had waited their entire lives for this moment. The sign above the entrance read in bold letters, "Ifeanyi Medical and Learning Center," and below it, "Healthcare as a Human Right." Ifeanyi, now Dr. Ifeanyi Okafor, stood before hundreds of families who had gathered from across Lagos and beyond. Many were the same people who used to stand in endless lines outside inadequate clinics, hoping for treatment they couldn't afford. "This hospital," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd without need for amplification, "represents something important. This isn't charity given by the wealthy to the poor. This is repair, fixing systems that never should have been broken." The applause was thunderous, but it was interrupted by the urgent wail of sirens approaching from the main road. An ambulance pulled up to the emergency entrance, lights flashing, and paramedics rushed out with a small form on a stretcher. A child who couldn't wait for ribbon cuttings and speeches. Ifeanyi looked at the crowd, then at the emergency unfolding before them. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with calm authority, "our first patient has arrived. The ceremony can wait." She ran toward the emergency ward, white coat flowing behind her. The emergency ward filled with the sharp scent of bleach and the rapid footsteps of medical professionals responding to crisis. Ifeanyi was leading the first life-saving intervention in her own hospital. The child on the stretcher was a 7-year-old boy with severe asthma, his breathing labored and his lips beginning to turn blue from lack of oxygen. His terrified mother ran alongside the gurney, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she begged. "We went to 3 other hospitals, but they said we couldn't afford the treatment." Ifeanyi placed her hand gently on the woman's shoulder while simultaneously directing her medical team with calm precision. "That will never happen here," she said firmly. Within minutes, the boy was stable, breathing easily with the help of the hospital's newest equipment. The crisis that could have been a tragedy became instead a testament to what was possible when healing was prioritized over profit. Tony stood in the observation area, watching his daughter work with the skill of someone born to save lives. For 40 years, he had wondered what success actually looked like. Now he knew. Outside, the crowd that had gathered for the ceremony began to chant, first quietly, then with growing volume, "Dr. Ifeanyi. Dr. Ifeanyi." As Tony listened to hundreds of voices calling his daughter's name, he realized something profound. The story of his life had found its true author. Everything he had built, all the wealth he had accumulated, had been preparation for this moment when love became action and action became healing. The girl who once shared her last meal with a stray kitten had become exactly who she was always meant to be.